double. That's double danger. The Chaldean mystery, how this amazing thing in the Bible has determined world history. I mean, it's determined everything. You know, God is still in control.
Yes,
everything we just said, God is still in control. From Egypt to now. I mean, every nation's rise or fall based on that covenant. Let me give you a little background on this. God is so real, that you read Genesis. You see everything that's happened, it begins in Genesis. Genesis, not only Adam, but Abraham, the Jews, the Arabs, everything begins in Genesis. But in Genesis, God says to Abram, get out of your father's house. I will make of you a great nation, and the whole world will be blessed in you. But whoever blesses you, I'm blessing. Whoever curses you, I'm cursing. You can mark that. Well, that's the Abrahamic covenant. And so it means that whatever person or power or empire or individual, whoever blesses Israel or the Jewish people will be blessed in some way. Whoever curses will be cursed. But it means more than that. It's also the law of reciprocity, meaning how you bless Israel, whatever you do to Israel will come back at you, will be done to you. So that's true of people. I can say I've never met a person in my life who loved Israel, loved the Jewish people, and wasn't a blessed person. Never. And I've never met a person who hates the Jewish people who wasn't cursed. Never. Never. And that's true for people. It's true for nations, even for America. So just to give you an idea, 3,500 years ago, the biggest center of the world wasn't New York City. It was Egypt, the Pharaoh's Egyptian empire. Ruled all over. You could not touch Egypt. But something happened in Egypt. Around that time, about 1200 BC, 13, they turn against the Jewish people. And you know it because it's the Exodus. They oppress them, enslave them, exploit them. At that very moment, all of a sudden, Egypt collapses. I will curse those who curse you. The Egyptian empire becomes nothing. It never rises again. And what happens to Egypt? It becomes a second-rate power that is enslaved. As they enslaved Israel, they are enslaved by nations. As they exploited Israel, they are exploited by nations. Next big thing, Assyria. Assyria, the Nazis of the ancient world. I mean, if we lived back there, this was the power, Assyria. And what did they do to Israel? Well, that's the harbinger. They are the inventors of terrorism, and they are the power that destroyed the northern kingdom. You never see the northern kingdom again. They wiped them off. That's where you get the 10 lost tribes. I mean, utterly destroyed them. There is no future for the northern kingdom. When you see about Jewish people today, it's the southern kingdom. They wiped them out. So what does the Abrahamic covenant say? Well, what you did to Israel will be done to you. All of a sudden, Babylon rises, other nations rise, and they attack Assyria and wipe them off the earth. So much so, as they did to Israel, so much so, there's not a trace left. Nobody knew where Assyria was. Nobody knew where the ruins were until the 1800s. As they did to Israel, God did to them. Next one, Babylon. What did they do to Israel? They exiled the people. They depopulated Jerusalem. They took everybody away. Babylonian captivity took everybody to another city. Jerusalem was a ghost city. That's what you read about. What happens to Babylon? Gets taken over by Persia. And as time goes on, Babylon becomes a ghost city. The people are depopulated and taken to another city. As they did to Israel, it was done to them. Next great power, and this is all in Daniel, you read the beast. Next is the Persians. Persian Empire. What does Persia do to Israel? They're the only power up to that point that actually sort of blessed Israel. They allowed Israel to return to the land. Darius, Cyrus, allowed them to return, rebuild but on a smaller scale as a province of Persia. What does God do to Persia? He allows Persia collapses. He allows Persia to rebuild its empire. It becomes the Parthian Empire, but it's smaller than it was. Then it falls, and then comes the Sassanid Empire. Persia keeps building its empire. He allows it to continue into the 21st century, and we know it today as Iran. Iran hates Israel, but it doesn't realize it exists because of Israel. Because back then, under Cyrus and Darius, they let Israel continue in a smaller way. God has preserved that one nation because they preserved Israel. And the only reason they exist is because of Israel.
Think about
it. It's amazing. Think about that. And they're trying to destroy Israel now. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Next one was Greece. Remember Hanukkah? Greece had war on Israel, but not so much physically, but it was spiritually. Greece tried to end the religion of Israel. They tried to make all the Jewish people turn away from the God of Israel to the God of the Greeks. And they used Greek culture, Greek language to get them away and apostatize. Well, what happens to Greece? Very interesting. Not only does Antiochus, who is a symbol of the Antichrist, the last year of his, when he, at the end of Hanukkah, all of a sudden he drops dead. His empire collapses. Within a number of years, it doesn't even exist anymore. But beyond that, what God does to Greece, what they did to Israel, God causes the Greeks to turn away from the gods of the Greeks and turn to the God of Israel. It was to the Jew first, then to the Greek. Actually, God redeemed it. They used the Greek language to get the Jews to apostatize. God used the Greek language to spread the gospel. That's why the New Testament's in Greek. I mean, even the gospel, God does it good, is in that. Rome comes up. What does Rome do to Israel? Destroys it, shatters it, spreads it across the world, spreads the Jewish people. That's why you have Jewish people in Hollywood, Jewish people in New York, Jewish people in Branson, because of Rome. Rome spread them across the world. They continued, but they were all across the world. What does God do to Rome? What happens is Rome is scattered. Rome in some ways never ended because Roman government all around the world. Senate, we have a Senate all around the world. President, that's from Rome. Capitoline Hill from Rome. Look all over the world, the capitals, it's all Roman. Our language is Latin, was shattered, became French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, even English, part of that. So Rome actually was scattered over the entire world in so many ways. After the ancient world comes a great power called Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire. What happens? It's strong, but all of a sudden comes a man named Justinian. Emperor Justinian. What he does is he passes laws against the Jewish people. All sorts of laws called the Code of Justinian. He wages war. They can't read the Bible in Hebrew. They can't do this. He takes their possessions away. All of a sudden, right after he does it, comes something called the Plague of Justinian. Strikes Byzantium. It's the bubonic plague. It's the first instance of the Black Death. Right after that happens. And then all of a sudden, within about a century and a half, Byzantium is shattered, has almost nothing left. It becomes a shadow of itself. Now, I want to bring something in because this is important where we are. The Jewish people start being persecuted by Europe. What happens is Muhammad rises up. Now, I want to say something here. Sometimes God allows powers to rise up as a judgment, not that he's for that power, but he allows them to be a judgment on the others. And so even when we see the rise of Islam now against Europe, against America, as America and Europe are turning away from God, this other power rises up. Well, it happened back then. God actually allowed the Islamic Empire to rise up. Europe and all these other powers were oppressing the Jewish people. The Islamic Empire, not so much. So he allowed them to prosper for a time. So God can even use these enemies of God for his purpose. But in Europe, what happens in the Middle Ages, Europe starts persecuting the Jews. I mean, big time. They expel them. England, France, in the 1200s, 1300s, all sorts of persecution befalls the Jewish people. In that same century, what happens? Comes the Black Plague. Again, the same thing that happened with Justinian, the bubonic plague returns to Europe. Then comes the 100 Years' War. Same thing. This is England and France. They just expelled the Jews. They are it becomes the worst time actually in history. Spain. Jewish people go to Spain. They are blessed there. They prosper there. There are hundreds of thousands of them there. And what happens to Spain? It rises, rises, rises to become the Spanish Empire. But just as it's rising, a guy named Torquemada comes in power. He says, we're going to have an Inquisition. The Inquisition was launched against the Jews. And so what happens is he convinces Isabella and Ferdinand to say all the Jews are out on this date. So he says you either leave or you get killed. The Jewish people have to leave Spain. Well, soon after that, Spain should have been in power. They had the whole new world pretty much. But what happens is Spain starts deteriorating until it becomes a second-rate power. Nothing left of the Spanish Empire. It all collapses as they turned on the Jews. When the Jewish people were fleeing Spain, they go to a city of provinces that were kind of loose provinces, that is Amsterdam. And the Dutch peoples, they go there. Amsterdam says, come in, Jewish people, and we're going to bless you. Amsterdam blesses the Jewish people, allows them to prosper. And what happens to Amsterdam? I will bless those who bless you. Amsterdam, this city, unlikely city, becomes a world empire. The Dutch Empire all over the world. God just raises up this unlikely bunch of regions. They become the great Dutch Empire, and they, with Jewish people involved in everything, and they help found America. That's where you get New Amsterdam, New York City. So whoever, it's like clockwork. And it's going to get much more dramatic another time where it gets to the English Empire, America, Russia, China, where we are. We'll see it at another time. But it has determined everything. God is true, and he's real, and he determines everything. The Chaldean mystery. Now, this is something we've touched on, but this affects us to this day. And I believe the full teaching is in this album there. But it also appears several times in the book under something called the Greek redemption, the Chaldean mystery, and also something called the Russian case.
Yes.
So let me take it for where we left off when I told it. It's 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, remember? And we touched on it earlier this week that at the same moment that they're going out, the Jews have to leave Spain, one of the greatest tragedies in Jewish history. The next day, God sends out 3 ships to find the greatest refuge. So that is part of this thing. So we left with Spain. Well, what happens to Spain? After this, Spain, the greatest empire in the world, God says, I will bless those who bless you, I will curse those who curse you, and as you do it to Israel shall be done to you. What happened to Spain? Ultimately, it becomes a second-rate power. The law of, God bless them today, but the law of Abraham, what God said, you bless them, I bless you. You curse them, you curse them. What happens? The Jewish people, where do they go? A lot of them end up going to the Ottoman Turkish Empire. Now, the Ottoman Turkish Empire, these are the sultans and all that going on. Guess what happens? They bless the Jewish people. They say, come on in, bless and prosper. All of a sudden, the Ottoman Turkish Empire becomes one of the greatest empires on earth. God lifts it up until you get to a leader called Suleiman the Magnificent. He's the one who put all those walls around Jerusalem. And it gets its peak. He blesses the Jewish people. But his son, called Selim the Drunkard, he ends up, he gets drunk all the time, and he turns against the Jews. What happens? At that same moment, as Selim turns against the Jews, all of a sudden the Ottoman Turkish Empire begins to descend, decline. It keeps declining, gets worse for the Jews. 19th century, they're persecuting the Jews. The Ottoman Empire becomes almost nothing, is getting ready to be destroyed. It's through their fall that Israel will find the land again, because they had the land of Israel. So as they blessed Israel, blessed. As they curse Israel, cursed. But there's another place that blesses the Jews. It's Amsterdam. This is your line. Yeah. Amsterdam says, come on in. The Jewish people come in. The first time in history, they pretty much have equal rights. Amsterdam. What happens to Amsterdam? This city, this little land, becomes one of the greatest empires on earth. The Jewish people were in the Dutch West Indies Company. They helped found all these routes. They were on Columbus's ship, as we said before. They were on all these ships. Amsterdam becomes one of the most powerful nations on earth. God will bless those who bless the Jewish people.
That's my heritage.
Yeah, it's your heritage.
They
bless the Jewish people.
Cornelius Bacher saved hundreds of Jews during the Holocaust.
Yes.
Is that,
yes.
That's so exciting. I found that in Israel.
Yad Vashem.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
And I believe he's blessed the line.
Right.
I know he has.
Yeah. In the 19th century, Western Europe all of a sudden emancipates the Jews. Up to that point, they were second-class citizens. They emancipate the Jews. What happens to Western Europe in the 19th century? Empires all over the world. You have one nation. Every nation's almost an empire. Dutch Empire, German Empire, French Empire, all over the world. At the same time, you have anti-Semitism rising out of the Austrians and Hungarian Empire. What happens is you have World War I comes. It strikes the most anti-Semitic areas of Europe. That's where the center was. At the same time, look what happened. Let me give you an example. Look what happens to Russia. Russia has more Jewish people probably than any other place. And Russia's a major power, but they never bless the Jewish people. They're always kind of persecuting. And so Russia, even though it's powerful, it is cursed. It's living like a backward nation. Russia, as they do to the Jewish people, it was done to them. But what happened is, as the 19th century got to its close, the czars, they decide to have a war against the Jews. They say, we're going to kill a third of them, we're going to the third of them, and the third of them we're going to drive out. That's why many Jewish people are in America. Part of my family is Russia. That's why we came, because the czars were doing it. What happens with the czars? They use the secret police against the Jews. The czars cause the masses, they ferment the masses to rise up and destroy the Jewish people. They're called the pogroms. What happens to the czar's government? As they do it, the masses of Russia rise up against the czars. And the czars, after hundreds of years, are overthrown. And a curse comes on Russia. The curse of communism comes on Russia. As the government used the secret police against the Jews, now the secret police is used against everybody. They're all oppressed. So you have a powerful nation, but it is never blessed. Now, on the other hand, you have the British Empire. What happens to the British Empire in modern times? The Jews are fleeing Russia. They go to two places. They go to Britain and America. Britain says, come on in. America says, come on in. What happens to the British? The British Empire at that period becomes the greatest empire the world has ever seen. It rules 1/4 of the Earth's surface, of the land surface. 1/4, it reaches its height. And then it goes into the Middle East, World War I, defeats the Turkish Empire, which is cursing the Jewish people. The British Empire gets the land of Israel. They bless the Jewish people, say, come back home, in Balfour Declaration, World War I. And at that moment, the British Empire reaches the height of its power. But what happens to Britain? You want to see the power of God? What happens is, in that period between the wars, they turn against the Jewish people. They say, you can't come back anymore, only very few. We won't let you. They start sinking Jewish ships, refugees. They start stopping them. They turn them back just when the Jewish people have to escape Hitler. And what happens? In 1939, they come out with a white paper. White paper says Jewish people for the next 5 years, 1939 to 1944, they're barely going to be able to come back at all. They need to come back. What happens? Those same years is World War II, and what happens is the British Empire, the greatest empire, is going to collapse to almost nothing in that same period. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. I will just touch for a second on Germany. Well, Germany had allowed the Jews to prosper, and Germany was prosperous, but then they turned against the Jews. Under Hitler, they killed 6 million Jews. How many Germans were killed in the war? 6 million, the same amount. The same amount. Same amount. They become a bombed-out shell under that. And where did they start their persecution of the Jews? Well, Hitler started his rise in Munich, Germany. And then they started the war against the Jews in the city of Nuremberg. They passed the Nuremberg laws. That's the beginning of the Holocaust. At the end of the war, what happens? I will bless those who bless you, curse. What happens? God judges the Third Reich in Nuremberg. The Nuremberg trials, they're put on trial, and they're judged in the same place where they sought to destroy the Jewish people by law. And then they take the ashes of when they were hung, they were cremated, and they scatter them in Munich, the place where Nazism began. I will curse those who curse you. What happens at the end of the war? Hitler is gone. Europe is in ruins. The empire, every empire is collapsing. This is where the Jewish people were killed. The two powers are left to rule the world. One is Russia and one is America. Russia still never blessed the Jewish people, but they blessed them militarily. They liberated the camps. They defeated Hitler. So think about this. They blessed them militarily, but not domestically. So Russia was blessed militarily, became the superpower for most of our lives, but was never blessed domestically. They were still a poor country. Exactly as they did to Israel, God did to Russia. Exactly. And then what was the other nation? America. What did America do? America, especially at the end of the 19th century, always blessed. By the way, the Puritans loved the Jewish people. They almost had us speaking Hebrew instead of English. It was almost we could have been speaking. That wouldn't. So there was a love for the Jewish people. America welcomed the Jewish people fleeing in the late 19th century, 1880 to the beginning. They had 2 million Jewish people fleeing for their lives came to America. That's why America has so many Jewish people. At that same moment, what happens to America? America rises to become the greatest economic power on earth. And World War I, greatest economic power, but they never blessed the Jews militarily until World War II. So what happens after World War II? America becomes the military superpower of the world as well. God does it exactly as he said. This has determined all of our lives from the moment we were born. What God said in Genesis was true. And now we're at a point where America, we touched on it, is in danger of cursing Israel. And at the same time, falling from God. So this is an ominous sign. You want to understand prophecy, history, our lives? God is so real. God is so real. And when he says something, he means it. It could be 4,000 years ago. He's going to still keep his promise. I mean, that's 4,000. If he's going to keep his promise for 4,000 years, how much is he going to keep his promise to us, each of us? And so whatever, all the powers that have tried to destroy the Jewish people are in the dust heap of history. All those powers